Good. Okay, School of Fun. I mean, this is where we're heading, I think. And hopefully we've got quite a lot of School of Fun here at the moment. These were old garages that were abandoned within 2 years of being set up. So the building was put up in 1975, and these garages were abandoned after about 2 years. They're very secluded and dark, and if you were driving in here with a car and putting your car into there and then getting out, it was actually quite a dangerous space, and people were attacked in these garages, and that's why people abandoned them. So the architects who designed the building hadn't thought enough about light, safety, community. They, put together a design that had won the contract, but there were definitely problems with it. Actually, modern cars are big, so they'd also misread the size of cars. There are still some of these garages being used on Mansfield Road, but because the road faces people walking along, they're safe. However, many of them are not used as garages because the cars are too big now. They're used as little workshops. So people are, or storing goods or something like that. So the original design of this space had errors, faults, mistakes in it. And Camden really struggled for more than 40 years to find a use for this space, and it was allegedly the drug dealing site for Northwest London for quite a long period of time, particularly I think in the 80s and 90s. And then we know that children who lived here were setting fires down here as something to do, because they told us, guys have told us that's what they did. And at that point, the council locked it up because it was becoming dangerous. People live here, so we have to be very careful of our residents. So we're a school and we've opened the space up, and there's lots of people, 600 people a term coming through the space and using it, and that makes it much safer. And we're very interested in this idea of fun. This is the biggest mosaic we've put up. It's on the River Thames on the North Bank, quite near St Paul's Cathedral. You can actually see Tate Modern in the background, the Globe Theatre, and the Millennium Bridge as well is there. And in that mosaic, there is Shakespeare. He used to, I'll show you, he's there. There's Queen Elizabeth, and there's Chaucer. Those three characters, I'll just mention. Shakespeare caught the boat from Blackfriars, where he's living, over to the Globe, where he was performing, putting on his plays. Elizabeth was queen, and Chaucer, in his time, was the tax collector who, when the boats came into the dock, Queen Hithe it's called, he collected the taxes. And it's the first place where the city won contract from the Queen, actually, who had originally got the contract, who collected the money. It's the first place that the city got to make money in a contract, and a continuous contract. We looked at the history of the site, and it's so full of history. There's 164 panels we put into this mosaic, and we just skimmed the surface. There is so much going on, and actually anywhere you go, that's the truth. There's a famous line from Omar Khayyam, a poet, who says, "Be careful where you tread, Caesar is buried there." So everywhere has stories to tell. And one of the things we do is we link streets to history. So there's a limitation with that, but it's one of our ideas. And there's an example of what we do. And this is made by young people who are at school with different abilities, sometimes in trouble, and it's a great piece of work. If you go along the North Bank, pop along and see it. Okay, next one. So I'll just give you a bit about my journey. Started out on the South Bank where I lived. I really like living near to where I work, so I don't have to walk. So I can walk to work, or at least get there on a bicycle, which I'm at the moment. So I found a disused space in the crypt of a church, and I did a deal with the vicar and said, if you give it to me for 6 months to get it going, then I will pay you £4,000 a year rent for this room. And it's a room about the size of a double garage like this, which, you know, was quite a good rate in that area, being in Waterloo, the very centre of London. And he agreed, gave me 6 months free rent, and then opened the studio working with artists and volunteers. The volunteers in that space were mostly homeless people because the church looked after homeless people, and we worked with them to transform the garden. This is putting a seat into the garden. We weren't allowed to put seats that people could sleep on, so we had to put curves into them. And we turned it into a sculptural garden, which is still there, St John's, Waterloo. Visit it if you can. When you're on the South Bank, it's worth a visit. And there are about 20 sculptures in there, and it's won the Green Flag Award for at least the last 6-7 years. So that's sort of because local people have taken control of planting and horticulture and sculpture and stuff. And the homeless people make the garden beautiful. So, I'm also very keen on this idea of an alternative to custody. So I'll come back to that later on in the talk, because it's just something that personally I'm interested in. And generally our aim is to make the neighbourhood more attractive. So wherever we are, because we can put a surface onto the built environment, then we can make it more interesting. And that's what we're keen on doing. And it means that actually wherever we go, we're quite useful, I think. I mean, just generally, artistic practice, we really want to work at the highest standards. I went and worked with a brilliant project called Save the World Project in Kingston as a volunteer. And I was really happy. They put mosaics up, but they were falling down after 2 years, some of them. And I was really struck by how much time and effort it took, and then things were going up and falling down. It didn't seem to me to be right. And so I was very keen on, if I was going to set something up, that the standard needed to be high. We wanted stuff to last for 200 or 300 years at least. Leonardo da Vinci said that if you want to be an artist, find a person, a master, he used the word, I think, but somebody who's excellent, and then copy them and practice by copying them. And the artist in the area of the South Bank that we were near to was William Blake. So we've dug into his history and found that in 1809 he'd had an exhibition where he sold nothing, and he was in despair and, disconsolate, and wrote, "If only my work was enlarged and put into public space." So we thought, whoa, this is so good. This is a great artist, William Blake, a poet and a painter and engraver, a wonderful person. and we could fulfill his wish, put his work up. We've put 70 of his works up in the streets around where he lived. He lived in a place called Hercules Buildings. It's now called Hercules Road. It's called that because the guy who owned the building, I think his name's Philip Astor, and he was a strong man who lifted weights and set up the first circus in London. And he'd made his money from the circus and built Hercules Buildings and called Hercules because he was the strong guy. So anyway, that's just digging into the history. We've filled about 5 tunnels coming out of Waterloo Station. There are a lot of tunnels, and we've filled about 5 of them. Those tunnels were tunnels that were quite dangerous spaces, so turning them into galleries means lots of people come to them. They were a barrier, conceived as a barrier in between where people lived on the south side of the railway line. Then there's a railway line, and then the north side, there's the jobs. So, for example, there's St Thomas's Hospital, there's Shell, there's the South Bank Centre, National Theatre, IBM, lots of big businesses, lots of jobs. But the railway line cut people off, and the tunnels were dangerous, long tunnels, dark, dank, dingy. And so we've worked with the local authority to make them bright galleries, and now they're visited by many people. Therefore, they're much safer. So we aim to be transparent, accountable, to be accessible, and to outreach. Non-judgmental is a difficult one because we do cast judgment, but I'd say that the way that we do it is by action rather than, I mean, I talk with people, obviously, like I'm talking with you, and I have judgment, but I'm not condemning people. And that's our approach. We're trying to act. So, for example, we work with young people who are in trouble, and we try to set a good example by behaving respectfully, calling them by their proper name, offering them refreshment, sharing our skills with them. So we're trying to not judge what they've done, why they're in their situation, and just showing a better way of doing stuff. And then we're designing for a better quality of life and particularly on the street. So a lot of mosaic work is interiors, but we've almost exclusively gone for public space, and we do a lot of work that's for free. So even out here on the front of the school, you'll see a project. We've been going at it for probably 2 years now on the wall. It'll still take another couple of years. It's all free. We're just making it, and I'm sure that it'll be visited from afar. People will come to see it in the future. And it's about who owns the street? Who owns public space? It's asking that question. Okay, next one. Before there was civilization, as hunter-gatherers, I think we only carried what we could travel with, and we moved from place to place. So there weren't that many artistic pieces, but of course there always were. Beads, necklaces, rings, figurines. So, you know, there's fantastic small pieces of artwork that have come down thousands of years old, 20,000 years old. And if you go back into the cave paintings, even older than that. So art seems to be a really old, ancient impulse in us. And there's a lot of anthropology and questioning going on, and really big arguments in between. It's a wonderful subject to look into. And, you know, there's kind of always a divide, isn't there, in the way that we look at things. So you've got Rousseau, who looks at the noble savage, and then you've got Hobbes, who looks at life is nasty, brutish, and short, and they're sort of juxtaposed with each other. Were we wonderful people who were kind and generous and helpful to each other in our origins, or has life always been nasty, brutish, and short? And certainly, I think the prevailing culture of our time would go with the latter, unfortunately. So last night, when I flicked off the television and went to bed, I'd just seen somebody shot in a film, and it was like, oh God, here we go again. Civilization has brought us lots of benefits. There's no question about it. It's opened up. I'm thinking, like, when I was young, there were 5,000 jobs I could do. I could. There's loads of things to do. If you'd have gone back 300-400 years, probably one main job, which would have been a peasant. And that would have been my life. And now I think the opportunities are much more. So they're great things that have come, but they come with a tag on them. And, you know, there are some bad stuff going on with civilization. Emblems of power and leisure. So Stonehenge, what an amazing place. And some of those stones were taken hundreds of miles from Wales and put up there. How they did it, we're still wondering. Okay. I was very lucky at the age of 3 months. I was on a boat to Singapore, and I've travelled a lot. In fact, when I was 23, I came to stay in Brixton and thought, wow, at last I can get to know the postman and the milkman and the people in my community. But certainly my youth seems to have been fairly nomadic. But one of the advantages of that is that you travel through a lot of towns and cities and villages, and you see that the most interesting buildings are the temples and the mosques and the churches. They're the tallest, they're the most colourful, and they're actually where the community got together and made things happen. So out of my window, I grew up in Thailand mostly, there was a temple, and that's where it was at. You know, that's where things were going on. It was wonderful. I saw Mosaic in a sort of almost Damascene moment in a like the St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. I just couldn't believe that you could put such beauty outside, and it was 400 years old, they told me, and I thought, wow. So not everything has to be brick and concrete. Mosaic then took over a lot of the civilized world. It starts in Uruk in ancient Sumeria, on the temple of Inanna. There are columns which are covered in patterned stone, and it seems to have spread there around the Mediterranean. The Greeks took it up and became brilliant, and in many instances people would say never been surpassed. But I mean, that's foolish as well to say that. But it became a brilliant art form, and the word is a Greek word, mosaic, muse of art. It's an original, prompter of art. They put it on the floors, and then in the Byzantine era, it rose off the floors onto the walls and then the roofs, and finally on the mosques, it covers the roofs and the outside of the buildings as well. Splendor of power internationally. It certainly held sway in Christianity and in Islam as well. It was very big, and it's used in India and it's used widely around the world. I mean, the actual definition, the juxtaposition of stones and tiles next to each other means that almost everything, a pavement, is a kind of mosaic. It declined, however, in the Renaissance because the merchants of Venice wanted pictures of themselves. Now, mosaic was really good at God and the emperor and things like that, but you needed teams of people to work on those things. And texts, of course, in Islam, it's the texts that are and the patterns which are absolutely brilliant and mesmerizing. But you needed teams of people, and Titian, who said that the mosaic is the finest art form in the world, was at the very moment of painting merchants and bankers and people and toppling mosaic. Although he drew the cartoons for some of the mosaics in Venice, at that very moment he was overturning mosaic through his own brilliance as a painter, and able to produce in 2 or 3 days or weeks perhaps something at a reasonable cost, which otherwise teams of people would have to make, and it would be unbelievably expensive. So only God or the emperor could afford mosaic. There was also an issue about realism, and painters became, in the Renaissance, able to deliver this realistic portrait of someone, and then the merchants and the bankers wanted pictures of themselves on the wall. Okay. This is just looking at ancient civilizations where it's estimated that 95% of their architecture is full of art, and art is absolutely inclusive, it's symmetrical, geometric, and then there's decorations on the surfaces. And then to the NatWest Tower in 1981, where people say 0% was art. And these, of course, these towers are now the temples of our time. And it seems as though there's something missing, perhaps, in between what used to be and what we've moved on to. Yeah, so, and we just have to think about whether, it has to be like that. So we're certainly interested in the idea that we can, for example, Grenfell Tower has cladding put up on it, £10 million, and it would keep this school going for 20 years with 12 people employed. And it would look really, really good if you put cladding of mosaic, and it wouldn't have to cover the whole building. It can be patterns and designs and forms and colours. Or you can put up something industrial, and as we've seen, it's become extremely dangerous, some of the stuff that we're doing. So we're sowing the seeds of our own destruction if we're not careful in many, many respects. And mosaic is an old, tried, tested, safe, secure way of tackling the issue of making something look good and interesting. Also in modern times, art seems to have moved, and there's an art market, and the art has moved into museums, and 95%, I think, of museums are full of, their works are not shown, so you only see a small percentage of it. And there's something strange about the art market. So our stuff is very valuable to us, but actually for people, it's worth nothing really, in a way. And we've got an art market, which is really interesting in how that functions. And often there's critiques of the art market, and then those people who critique it become the artists of the future as well. So, I mean, it is an interesting art market, but yeah, I just wonder about it moving into the museum and gallery and out of our own lives. Where it was in the temples and mosques and churches, it was part of our daily lives. And I would like to see that being brought back. What you're doing here today is exactly that. It's people coming in, seeing things, and it's public. Where it's private in your own home, that's great as well, but it is still private. It's just an old question. Michael Palin lives just down here, and this was one of Monty Python's "What Did the Romans Ever Do for Us?" one of their jokes. So they did an incredible amount of things, and of course they brought mosaics. Interestingly, the mosaics that they made have been 2,000 plus have been discovered, and most of them are reburied as the best way of looking after them, although it's actually not a very good way of looking after them. So we're also a school to make sure that those things are uncovered. They create jobs. Fishbourne Roman Palace, I don't know if you've ever visited it, it's near Chichester, 22 people employed throughout the year, schools go there, and it's an interesting day. And often these Roman villas are in quite remote places, so rural jobs, if you're interested in, this is one thing we could do. But okay, so this is a civilization that's collapsed, and we know that they brought some really interesting things, but they also brought some dodgy things, and prisons in those days were generally holding places before you killed people. So you would get captured, put in prison, and then you would be fed to lions or whatever. So there were some very difficult things about Roman culture as well. So I'm just going to pick up on that, and the role of myself as an artist, and what I'm interested in is, why do we put lions in safari parks? Lions are killers, really dangerous killers, they would kill us. And we put them in safari parks because it's a better way of life for them. And when they're in cages, they have mental health issues, so they've worked that out. Lions go mad in cages. They don't live that long either and stuff. So in prisons, humans live about, men, I think, about 56 years, women, I think, about 48 years in prison, and prison officers about 58 years. So it's a really dangerous, horrible, nasty place to live. So I'm, as an artist, looking at this question. So I think art's, one of the roles is to challenge our assumptions. I think all our assumptions are based on the fact that dangerous, horrible people are put away and got out of sight, out of mind. And so what we do here is ask the question, are prisons a dead end? Because I think they might be. So we would like to see prisons, there are 128 in Britain, replaced with 5,000 therapeutic centres. There are 700 towns in Britain, towns and cities. So every town would have a therapeutic centre, and some of the bigger cities would have 5, 10. London might have 20, 30. And in that, prisoners would not ever stay in the therapeutic centre, although there would be that facility, but they would pay back to the community, and they'd do horticulture, maintain public buildings, roads, do sort of useful things, market gardening. They can be involved in art and design. We work with them in that aspect. sculpture and mosaic. But there's lots of things you can do. So Jeffrey Archer, for example, I don't know what particularly he did wrong, but he's a multimillionaire. He still is a multimillionaire. We paid £70,000-80,000 to keep him in prison for 2 years. It would have been much better for him to work with us, use his intelligence to help us, serve his sentence for 2 years, pay back to the community, rather than us paying £70,000 to keep him in prison for 2 years. And I would suggest also with somebody so wealthy, fine him. So he pays for the criminal justice system. But there are different ways of looking at major issues and problems in our lives. And art and design and craft is a way of finding answers to some of the really difficult questions. And we saw that the Romans had prisons and kept people in cages, and we're still doing it today. And sometimes I do think the olives and the wine are fantastic, but some of the things they did were definitely wrong, like crucifixion. Seems to me to have been a big mistake, but it became symbol for a new religion. So one time the Christians were fed to lions and were criminals, and now, today, they've built wonderful churches, sing incredible hymns, and have produced music and art that's, fantastic. So, when we face people, we're looking at Mark was homeless and been in and out of prison, I don't know, 20 times. So he ended up as a flower seller outside St. John's Church. And he's found his own way now. I don't actually know where he is now, but he found his way into a house, and he's the last we saw, he had a cat pet, and he seemed to be managing okay. So I think he lives in West Norwood or something. But if you see strengths and talents in people, then there's always a way through. Okay. Those horses are from a place called Camargue, and I don't know if they've got a hierarchy or not, but they just run free. So that's what we're up to. Yeah, being open. Okay. One more. Yeah. There's room at the table.
Thank you.
Is that too short?
That's fine. It's actually on time, so we've got time for Q&A.
Okay.
And questions.
Can you update us on your development plans? How's that?
Yeah, I mean, they should, it should have happened by now. With building plans, there are many difficulties. I think people live here, so we're absolutely health and safety. We need to be safe for people. There's a gas pipe that runs here, and they didn't know it. So they found it now because we're doing the development. We've put in 3 gas detectors and we're here every day. So we're saying it's never been safer, but still, there's always 100 reasons why you can't do something. So we just say there's one reason why we do it. Let's do it. Let's just do it. It's delayed now, the latest I've heard, till January. And there are issues around the gas pipe. Gas is on its way out, so it's in 9 years it'll become illegal anyway. So there's lots of different things you can do, but actually removing the pipe and putting gas outside into each of I think there's 24 people above this area who have gas, could cost £600,000. So it would actually cost us about 20,000 to buy new electric cookers for them at a high standard. But, some people prefer gas. So while it's legal, that's an issue at the moment. But we're saying, look, we're here. Use us as your example, and we will be good stewards of the property. On the positive side, all the money's there. We've got all the people ready to go, and there's absolutely no reason why they can't start the work tomorrow or Monday, say. It's going to happen. It's been empty for 40 years, so and when it's empty, then people find uses for that emptiness, and those uses were often antisocial. So it's a good reason that if we're here, it's much safer. We're open. People can come in, see what we're doing. And so it will happen, but it always takes time. And building projects just do take time.
So they're not saying that you have to leave the space, they're saying you can't develop the space.
Yeah, no, the gas people have said there's no problem at all. So they own the pipe, apparently, but it's gas and local authority. Local authorities have to be extremely careful. They are public facing. They've got legal departments. They've got all kinds of checks and balances because they are public facing. And then there's so many reasons why you can delay something. So I've actually put in a bid to Trust for London to learn how to work with the local authority and make it a positive relationship. Because, we want to put solar panels on the roofs, huge roofs here, possibly 8,000 square meters of roof. But other people living in the flats have said things like, but our roofs have leaked for the last 50 years, so okay. Why? I don't believe that's true, by the way, but if there's a perception like that, why is it that those types of perceptions take root and people can say, why would we have solar panels when we can't even get our roof to stop leaking? And we would say, let's fix both at the same time.
So that'd be a good reason to tackle it. And so what kind of programs, so I can see that there's very interesting things going on here and a lot of outreach work.
Yeah.
So how would this development, would it be more outreach?
There'll be 50 studios and 4 or 5 key anchor community groups, one of which is Little Hands Design, with their own space designed with the architects and able to have community areas like this where you can hold bigger meetings, and they will have double or 4 spaces. Some of the larger groups will have 4 spaces, and then there will be a radio station. So our Urban Extra are due to film in the next week or so down here as well, and they're very keen on moving in. So that would immediately give us outreach, because they are into Camden Against Violence and they're working very strongly as a community organisation. So all the groups in here would then have a voice which would be around the area, and that would continue the outreach work.
We really can't stop that from happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the kids, we're doing things like homework clubs as well. And I mean, Little Hands Design do fantastic work out in the community. And I think the outreach continues. And when you get more artists, then there'll be more people doing things. We're running summer school as well through till September the 4th. So people can come for free and work on the wall outside and just make stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah. Anyway, good. Okay. Sharing our stories. Yeah. We're storytelling people, meaning-making animals. Or, yeah, meaning-making people.
Creating meaning,
Yeah, creating meanings and working.
rationalizing what we do.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, the non-judgmental thing is difficult because, you know, we do need to judge what's going wrong and make up our own minds. And you know, there are people doing bad things, and that's absolutely certain.
Yeah, but we
But-
can't judge them without knowing why, and we don't want to do that. We can only judge ourselves.
Yeah,
Decision for ourselves with what we are doing, we're happy with ourselves or not. You can see the world turning, but every one person needs to make their own decision about if they're happy with the life they're living.
yeah. And power structures are really complex. And for me, I've sort of come down to that picture of the horses,
Yeah.
that the only power really is responsibility, being responsible. So leadership is about showing, behaving well. That's what leadership is about. And if you have a prime minister who's telling lies, or a president who is unable to tell the truth, then you can see the things really going into difficult areas. Yeah, yeah.
It's our choice in some way.
It is our choice, that's right.
We don't want to hear the truth, is what the truth is. It's too difficult for us to hear. Like we talk about sustainability, we don't want to hear the real truth about it. We don't want to hear the real truth about poverty. We're happy to sit here and donate money to Oxfam, but we don't want to be touched by it. We don't
Yeah.
want to actually live it. Like we talk about here, the homeless and we have the taken of crime. So we don't want to see it, like you said, so we push it away somewhere else. And you know, how many people would be happy to come here and volunteer if they knew there were some criminals, you know, or ex-criminals? And that's what the problem in this society is, that we judge too much without judging ourselves. So what decisions we make for giving back,
Yeah,
and how we create that society of
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's quite existentialist as well. What you're saying, that I exist and then I become and make meaning. The one thing on that is it's there's a lot of pressure as well, and it's like, let's have a holiday.
Yeah. But that's about
Sometimes.
authority, because we've been told it's authoritative, so we can't be ourselves anywhere.
Yeah,
Like we're wearing masks, you know, and that's sort of that we're trying to be good people by wearing masks, but then it's an authority who's telling us that's the good thing to do.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So
yeah.
freedom.
Okay, I think we're going to have to stop.
Yeah.
talking.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting.
Good. Okay.